Why does your intuition get overridden even when you know something feels off? Today we're going to look at why your inner knowing often gets drowned out. I felt called to speak to this topic today because it's an area that I have a lot of personal experience in, and I trust that a lot of others could benefit from my personal experience in growing through this particular area of challenge. And as someone that is a self-confessed, I guess, overthinker, or has been a strong, or has had a strong preference towards the logical interpretation and analytical interpretation of the world from a young age, I've certainly had to work at allowing this other way of knowing, this, I guess, more accurate way of knowing, really, come in, which we refer to as intuition. And so, for me, I've got plenty of examples of how I've known something, but then chosen not to listen to that inner knowing. So I'll share a few of those to get us started, because some of these might resonate for you. One would be, well, the most obvious one would be in the early stages of a relationship, sensing that something is a bit off and not quite right, yet ignoring this and persisting with the relationship anyway. Another would be having a sense of the importance to speak up, yet staying quiet, only to register later on that that was a bad idea and perhaps I should have spoken up. A sense that internally, and this relates to the previous example, that the right thing to say for me would be no, yet saying yes anyway. Second guessing decisions just in general, not just the yes or no ones, but having a kind of clear sense of what the right move is, and then going back and forth because the mind kicks in and wants to go with the option that makes sense. And then there's just the moments that I think a lot of us can appreciate, where we say to ourselves, I knew that. And so if those examples resonate with you, there's a good chance, just like me, you've ignored the inner knowing and have had it overridden by generally the mind or aspects of you that felt the need to be in control, protect you. And that's one place to really start to take this video as far as how I might be able to support you in overcoming this challenge that you may have with knowing the difference between what's intuitive and what's not, is starting with the difference between how intuitive guidance comes through and how a protective signal shows up. In that an intuitive sense is clear, is quiet, and it tends to be non-urgent. Whereas the protective signal is often louder, persuasive, and has a sense of urgency that something needs to happen now. So that's one way to really start to figure out what's going on here. And often it is that intuition is there initially, and then this interference kind of comes in. This protective mechanism comes in over the top because we fear of some kind of consequence, subconsciously generally, but it can show up as a conscious fear, but it's often driven by a deeper belief or a part of us that feels the need to jump in with protection. A need for approval is another reason that interference runs in or jumps in, because belonging to the tribe or feeling connected to others is important to our sense of emotional survival, and therefore can override our natural sense, our natural intuition. And these sorts of examples, for most of us, link back to our past conditioning, to these early experiences that we had that sensitize us to protecting ourselves in particular ways, depending on the unconscious beliefs or the parts of us that are formed in the personality to keep us safe. So that's intuition versus protection. And then the other area to kind of look at with telling the difference is how intuition tends to come up as a more instant response, whereas thinking tends to build an argument over time. So that could again be another way for you to start to tell the difference as to what's going on here for you. And then there's just knowing versus trusting that knowing, which isn't really a difference in two types of information. It's more that we know, but that the acting on the knowing is the problem, and trusting that it is safe to act on that inner knowing is something that needs to be built up over time, and only through repeated experience of acting on that inner knowing will really strengthen that trust. It's not something you can just flick a switch on and all of a sudden be trusting. It tends to involve you taking a bit of a chance and leaning into it, and over time discerning, okay, that was intuitive guidance and it worked when I followed it, versus the times when I ignored it and should have, perhaps. And so what I also wanted to guide you to in this video is something simple, something that you can do to help in moments where you're perhaps a bit uncertain. And the obvious starting point is to pause, is to slow things down and pay attention to the signals just as they come through. What came first and what came second? What came just after the initial signal to, I guess, a decision being made or a circumstance unfolding that you need to respond to? And the sorts of things you want to pay attention to, I would suggest, is whether the signal feels contracted or open, and whether the signal feels steady or urgent. And it is often the case that protective parts have this sense of urgency or self-protective mechanisms that are not necessarily based on the circumstance, but based on some unconscious belief patterns, have a sense of urgency that something needs to happen right now, or some kind of action needs to be immediate, when whereby an intuitive piece of guidance has more of a steadiness to it. And so checking those signals, often it is that intuition is the first signal and protection is the second. So that stopping and pausing and noticing what came first and what came second is a very kind of simple way. I should say it's not always going to be the case that the initial feeling of intuition is going to have that steadiness and openness to it. If I'm, confusing anyone by insinuating that the first signal is a calm, gentle kind of yes signal, because of course intuition can be a no, such as maybe we meet a new person and the first sense we get is no, this person doesn't feel like a safe option to me. And the difference, I would say, between whether that is intuitive or some defensive, self-protective aspect is whether it remains steady. If there's a no and it holds that steadiness, more likely to be your intuition saying, this doesn't feel right with this situation or person. Whereas a protective part can have that sense of no, but an urgency just to run away, and may just be an emotional response to feeling vulnerable and wanting to protect yourself from opening up to a connection with someone that doesn't actually need to unfold. So pause, check the signal, what comes first, what comes second, and the quality. Does it feel open? Does it contract me? Does it feel urgent? Does it feel steady? And a rule of thumb would be that the intuition is usually the first signal. And just to bring this to a close, I want to finish by stating that your intuition is already there. I repeat this a lot. It's a feature of the course that I'll soon be releasing, that you already know the answer. We all do. It's just that we don't trust in what's coming through. And that's come from many years for most of us being programmed by the world to lean into the analytical side, the thinking, and these protective aspects that, I guess, speak to us louder. And when we can trust in what's already there and learn to listen to these signals, we can be guided through life in beautiful and wonderful ways. And so if you're interested in really enhancing those skills within yourself, I've spent the last 20 years gathering various ways to really enhance my ability to lean into and trust in my intuitive capacity as someone who has, I said at the start, been a real strong thinker, and I still have a very keen analytical mind, so that hasn't changed. And I've been fortunate enough to gather a range of different methods from different areas of my own personal growth that I'd like to share with as many people as I can, so that we can all learn to go with the flow of this guidance that is really coming from an aspect that, in my opinion, is more naturally aligned with truth, with our inner truth. So if you're interested, you can go to my website through the link below and make an inquiry to access this work in a deeper way. Thank you. Thank you for watching.